If you've ever watched your own family celebrate your loss while pretending it was for your own good, then you'll understand exactly how I felt the morning my grandfather was buried. Because less than 2 hours after they lowered his casket into the frozen Montana ground, my brother unlocked Grandpa's ranch, walked through the front door, and told me, "You don't belong here anymore." The worst part? Everybody agreed with him. My father, my mother, my aunts, my uncles, even neighbors I'd known my whole life stood there pretending not to hear it. For a few terrible minutes, I honestly believed they were right. Then, an elderly county recorder quietly pulled me aside, looked at my driver's license, and asked one simple question. "Miss Carter, has anyone ever told you your name is still on the deed?" That single sentence changed everything. But before I tell you how my family lost the ranch they thought they'd already won, you need to understand how we got there. My name is Abigail Carter. I'm 44 years old. I was born and raised outside Livingston, Montana. Population small enough that everybody knew your truck before they knew your name. Where people judged your character by whether you fixed your neighbor's fence without being asked, and where my grandfather, William Carter, was respected by almost everyone. Grandpa wasn't rich because he got lucky. He wasn't born into money. He earned every acre the hard way. He fought droughts, harsh winters, bank loans with impossible interest rates, disease outbreaks that nearly wiped out his cattle. There were years he worked 18-hour days, only to finish the season owing more money than he'd started with. But somehow, he never quit. By the time I was born, Grandpa Ranch covered almost 2,300 acres, rolling hills, creeks that never dried up, hundreds of Black Angus cattle, a century-old red barn, and a white farmhouse sitting high enough on the ridge to watch the sunset over Paradise Valley every single evening. To most people, it was valuable land. To Grandpa, it was family. He used to tell me, "Land remembers who loved it." I didn't understand those words when I was little. Years later, I'd finally learn exactly what he meant. My father, Thomas Carter, was Grandpa's only son. Strong, hardworking, proud. Too proud, sometimes. He believed ranching was about numbers. Weight gain, market prices, profit margins. Everything had a dollar value, including people. My older brother, Caleb, was exactly like him. 6'3", broad shoulders, natural confidence. The kind of man who could walk into a livestock auction and have everybody shaking his hand before he spoke a single word. Dad loved that. Grandpa tolerated it. I noticed the difference long before anyone else did. When Caleb won his first rodeo buckle, Dad framed the newspaper clipping. When I won the state conservation scholarship, Dad glanced at the certificate and said, "That's nice," then asked Caleb how football practice was going. That pretty much summed up my childhood. I wasn't ignored, not exactly. I just never seemed to matter as much. If Caleb fixed one section of fence, Dad bragged about him for weeks. If I spent an entire summer rebuilding Grandpa's irrigation system, people called it helping out, like it wasn't real work. Funny how invisible hard work becomes when people already decided who deserves the credit. The one person who never treated me differently was Grandpa. Every Saturday morning, before the sun came up, he'd knock on my bedroom window with the handle of his old pocket knife. I'd already be awake, pull on my boots, grab 2 biscuits Mom had left on the stove, then climb into Grandpa's faded green pickup. We'd spend the entire day together, checking fences, moving cattle, repairing windmills, fishing the creek behind the north pasture. He never talked much, neither did I. We didn't need to. Some people make silence uncomfortable. Grandpa made it feel like home. One afternoon, I couldn't have been more than 12, we were replacing rotten fence posts along the western boundary. He handed me the survey map. "Know what this is?" "The property line." He smiled. "Not exactly." I frowned. It shows who owns the land. He shook his head. No, it shows who the county thinks owns the land. I didn't understand. He tapped the corner where several names appeared. Paper matters, but paper can also fool people. At the time, I thought he was simply teaching me about property records. I had no idea he was planting the first clue to the biggest secret our family had ever kept. Years passed. High school came and went. Caleb stayed home to work beside Dad. Everyone assumed I'd leave Montana. Instead, I earned a degree in agricultural land management at Montana State University, not because I wanted an office, because I wanted to protect ranches like ours from disappearing. When I came home after graduation, I expected Dad to be happy. Instead, he looked at my diploma, set it on the kitchen table, and said, "So, you finally ready to get a real job?" I laughed. I thought this was one. It is if you're Caleb. The room went silent. Mom pretended to wash dishes she had already cleaned. Nobody argued. Nobody defended me. They just let the words hang there. Grandpa finally stood up from his chair, looked straight at Dad, and then quietly said, "You're making a mistake, Tommy." Dad shrugged. "She's too smart for ranch work." Grandpa smiled. "No, she's exactly smart enough for it." Dad rolled his eyes. Neither of them knew I'd remember that conversation for the rest of my life. Over the next 15 years, I became Grandpa's shadow. Every conservation grant, every grazing rotation, every government inspection, every drought plan, every tax filing, I've handled it beside him. Caleb? He focused on cattle sales. Dad handled expansion loans. I handled everything nobody noticed, until it stopped working. Then suddenly, everyone remembered who had been doing it. Grandpa started calling me partner, not because paperwork said I was, because that's how he saw me. He'd introduce me around town. "This is my granddaughter, best ranch manager in the county." Those words meant more to me than any paycheck ever could. Dad hated hearing them. He didn't say so. He didn't have to. Every compliment Grandpa gave me felt like a criticism of Caleb in Dad's eyes. Family dinners became tense. Every achievement somehow turned into a competition. One Thanksgiving, Grandpa thanked me for saving nearly $60,000 through a new water conservation program. Before I could answer, Caleb laughed. "Guess paperwork finally pays." Several relatives chuckled. Dad smiled into his coffee. Nobody told him to knock it off. Grandpa simply looked at Caleb and said, "Paperwork is the only reason this ranch still belongs to this family." Caleb laughed again. He thought Grandpa was joking. Grandpa wasn't. Neither was I. At the time, none of us realized those words would become the key to everything. The funeral ended just after 2 in the afternoon. Most people drifted toward the fellowship hall for coffee and casseroles. My parents, however, had somewhere else to be. The ranch. Dad jingled a fresh set of keys in his hand as though they were a trophy. "Let's get this over with," he said. Luke grinned. "I've already got contractors coming Monday." The words hit me harder than I expected. Grandpa had been gone for less than 3 hours. His favorite coffee mug was probably still sitting beside the kitchen sink. The porch swing he rebuilt with his own hands was still moving in the afternoon wind. And my brother was already scheduling renovations. Nobody questioned it. Not Mom, not my aunt, not our cousins. Everyone climbed into their trucks and followed Dad down the county road. I stayed behind for a moment. The cemetery had grown quiet. Fresh dirt covered Grandpa's grave. I rested my hand on the cold granite marker. "I'll take care of it," I whispered. "I promise." Then I drove toward the ranch. By the time I arrived, Luke had already parked his brand-new pickup in Grandpa's spot beside the barn. Dad stood on the porch talking with two local contractors. They were discussing which walls should come down first. The kitchen's too small. The old office has to go. We'll modernize the place. Modernize. They spoke about Grandpa's house the way developers talked about abandoned buildings. I climbed the porch steps. Luke glanced at me and forced a smile. "Hey, we're just making plans." I looked past him into the living room. Grandpa's boots still sat beside the fireplace. His reading glasses rested on the end table. Nothing inside that house looked abandoned. "It hasn't even been one day," I said quietly. Luke shrugged. "Life moves on." Dad folded his arms. "The ranch has to keep operating." I nodded once. "I know. So let's wait until the attorney finishes probate." Luke laughed. "Probate?" He held up his keys. "Dad already has authority. The ranch is staying in the family." Something about the confidence in his voice unsettled me. Not confidence, certainty, as if he'd known the outcome long before Grandpa died. I looked at Dad. "When did you get those keys?" His expression barely changed. "Your grandfather gave them to me last month." That surprised me. Grandpa had never mentioned it. Not once. Before I could ask another question, Luke reached into his pocket and unlocked the front door. He stepped inside, turned around, and smiled. "Guess this is home now." The sentence echoed through the old farmhouse. For the first time in my life, the place felt unfamiliar. I didn't argue. Instead, I turned around and walked back toward my truck. Luke called after me. "Don't worry, you can stop by sometime." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way everyone laughed afterwards, as if I were a guest, instead of someone who had spent half her life helping Grandpa keep that ranch alive. I drove away before anyone could see the tears in my eyes. The next morning, I was making coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Margaret Ellis, Grandpa's attorney." I answered immediately. "Sarah? Could you stop by my office this afternoon? Is something wrong?" A pause. "There's a document I'd like you to see." Her tone wasn't alarming, but it wasn't casual either. "I'll be there." Margaret's office sat inside a brick building overlooking the courthouse square. She'd handled my grandfather's legal work for nearly 30 years. When I walked in, she already had 3 thick folders spread across her desk. She motioned toward the chair across from her. "I've been reviewing your grandfather's property history." I frowned. "Okay." She slid an old county survey across the desk. The paper was yellow with age. Hand-drawn property lines crossed the page. Near the bottom, my grandfather's signature appeared beside another name. Mine. I stared at it. "What is this?" Margaret adjusted her glasses. "In 2007, your grandfather transferred an survivorship deed." I looked back down. "I don't understand." She pointed to the document. "He transferred an ownership interest to you." My heart stopped. "When?" "The week after your college graduation." I searched my memory. Grandpa had taken me into town that day. He'd said we needed to sign a few papers. I assumed they were conservation permits. I never looked twice. Margaret folded her hands. "Legally speaking, you've been a recorded co-owner of the ranch for 18 years. Silence filled the office. Finally, I whispered, "My parents don't know." Margaret met my eyes. "No, they don't."